So, in which case, let's get started. Whoop. So, as I explained, I'm your technical host today, but in order to launch the webinar, I'd like to hand over to Selvaraju Ramasamy, who's the FAO Senior Agricultural Officer and head of the Research and Extension Unit. Selvaraju will provide the opening words of welcome and introduction, and then the next speaker will be Pierre Labarte from INRAE in France, and Pierre is the coordinator of our AGRILINK project, our EU-funded AGRILINK project. So, Selvaraju, over to you, please.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon to all participants and also the panelists. On behalf of the organizers, I welcome all the panelists and participants to this important webinar on extension and advisory services for the empowerment of small-scale producers and family farmers. As you may aware, the webinar is organized jointly by the European Union funded AGRILINK project partners and the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. And the main aim is to strengthen the ongoing collaboration and also sharing of experiences. More specifically, this event aims to explore the opportunities, challenges associated with the current trends in the digital delivery of extension and advisory services, with a specific focus on the empowerment of smallholders and family farmers. In this time of unprecedented challenges affecting agri-food systems and rural livelihoods, it is clear that digital technologies have a role to play in reforming agricultural extension and advisory services by enabling better knowledge exchange and decision making. The adoption of digital tools has been a widespread trend to improve the delivery of agricultural extension and advisory services over the past decades, and more so in the recent years. Digital EAS initiatives worldwide have started to provide a range of services, including agricultural advisory services, market linkages, financial access, supply chain management, and various bundled services, including some aspects related to financing and credit facilities, etc. The COVID-19 pandemic has broadened the use of digital tools for sharing information, delivering EAS to small-scale producers, and also for receiving the feedback from the beneficiaries. The digital technologies have brought new opportunities for EAS delivery that includes improved reach in geographically remote areas, bridging the information gap among different value chain actors, contributing to market accessibility, producer-consumer linkages, social and financial inclusion, and so on. Digital EAS can enhance accessibility, cost efficiency, transparency, and the impacts of information services for smallholder farmers, including youth, women, and other vulnerable groups. As the digital revolution accelerates, attention should also be focused upon the risks that the digital EAS may bring, especially inequality in access and lack of knowledge in using these tools by the most vulnerable food system actors. On the other hand, the dividends from the use of digital technologies are not automatic. Capacity gaps still exist in access that affects the access to digital EAS by the smallholder producers and family farmers. There are many barriers for scaling up the digital EAS. Some of the prominent ones include low level of digital literacy, insufficient digital human capital development and infrastructure investments in rural areas, and more. Therefore, smallholder farmers need to be empowered by innovative approaches and by removing the barriers to access and the use of these technologies by enabling them so that they can benefit from these new and innovative solutions. And also, this is useful for achieving economic, environmental, and social sustainability, and thus no one left behind in the era of digital technology advancements. This webinar is preceded by an e-discussion with the active participation of experts from around the world. The webinar will start with the presentation from AGRILINK project partners, with whom FAO has a very successful partnership. The webinar is organized in 2 sessions, as it was mentioned by Mark earlier. Session 1 will focus on role of advisory systems and related policies in maximizing impact of digitalization in EAS and minimizing the digital divide. Session 2 will focus on empowerment of smallholder farmers and policy recommendations. Each session will start with a general presentation and lead to a panel discussion based on a concrete studies and country cases. We have a lot to offer from this webinar. I request your active participation in the discussions. Thank you for your attention. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Selvaraju. I'd like to thank you very, very much indeed for setting the scene so very, very nicely, so comprehensively, so concisely. I'd like to hand over now to my colleague, Pierre, in order to give a brief overview of the AGRILINK project and a preliminary insight into some specific areas of interest of relevance to this webinar.
Hi, Mark. Hi, everybody. Can you see my screen and hear me well?
Yeah.
Perfect. So thank you very much. I will start by presenting myself. By introducing myself. My name is Pierre Labarthe. I'm a researcher at INRAE, the French Public Research Institute on Agricultural, Food and the Environment. And I'm also the coordinator of AGRILINK, the H2020 project that deals with the role of advisory services for innovation in European countries. We were very lucky during the course of the project to meet Nevena Alexandrova, and we had lots of exchange, and we see lots of common points and opportunity of debate about the effects of digitalization on advice in both North and South countries. So we are very grateful to have this webinar to go a bit deeper into this discussion. So we are really looking forward to the result. This presentation will be rather short. So first, I will briefly introduce you our project, then highlight briefly some of our results or insights on the relations between digitalization and advisory services. What are the challenges, the pitfalls, and the opportunities? And then introduce a bit further the program for our webinar today. So a brief introduction to our project. So the aim of AGRILINK was to contribute to a transition toward more sustainable development of European agriculture by focusing on the specific role that farm advisory services played in this regard. We have 2 different aims. The first one is to better understand the role that services play for farmers' decision-making regarding their decision to adopt or not different innovation, be they technological innovation or more social and organizational innovation. So that's a big part of the project. And the second aim was to also try to contribute ourselves to enhance the functioning of advisory services by using different tools such as living labs or other co-design methodology to work together with advisors, researchers, and farmers to try to co-develop new services. What is important to notice as well is the context of the project, that our work was implemented in parallel with a really growing interest at the European scale of agricultural knowledge and innovation system within policy. So that means within the next common agricultural policy of the European Union, there will be some specific tools designed to support AKIS or AES, as you would say maybe, in different countries. So the ambition of the project was to contribute to this renewed understanding of the contribution of advice to innovation adoption. And to do so, we have two key specificities of the project. The first one is that we really started from farmers' perspective. And we did a big survey with more than 1,000 farmers interviewed to try to identify farmers' personal networks, but also potentially gaps in their access to advisory services. The second feature of the project is strong multi-actor dimension. Our project include partners both from research, but also a diversity of advisory organizations, public, private, and farmer-based ones. The impact of the project. So the project started in 2017 and we closed in a few weeks. So our concept we came with our impact is first that we came with new concept and methods. So we developed the concept of micro-AKIs to analyze at the level of farmers the sources of knowledge and services they assemble to adopt or not innovation. We have a strong empirical content, as I just said, with over 1,000 farmers interviewed in 13 countries, more than 250 interviews with advisory suppliers, and also empirical evidence derived from living labs that we run in 6 different countries. We also had many different events with stakeholders, 40 workshops with over 500 participants, and we work in different innovation areas, be they technological, process, marketing, or organizational. So, what are the insights of the project about digitalization? The first thing that we would like to say, and I think it's also common to this to the framework of this webinar, and also to discussion and research and expertise provided by FAO, that are 2 levels to address the decision. The first one is about the role that advisory services for farmers play directly in the dissemination of digital technology for farmers. And I think that's a very important role of advice. And in our project, we had case studies in various countries, Czech Republic, France, Poland, Portugal, and UK, where we try to understand the role of advice in the dissemination of drone, electronic bells, decision tools, and so on. And you will have some example of this case in a later presentation. But we also try to say, with our living lab approach and co-design approach, to test the potential of digitalization to enhance the functioning of farm advisory services, and we test this in various living labs in Spain and Norway. So first results, just to start a bit the discussion. On the first part, on the role of advisory services for the dissemination of digital technology, we have 3 main findings that I would like to highlight. The first one is that we don't see any shortcut at the moment. That means that digital technology do not replace advisory services, but it's rather classical face-to-face advisory services which are used to support and disseminate this technology in many of our cases. The second insight is that we find issue about relation between about access to advisory services and inequalities and difficulty of access for certain population. What we like to stress is that this unequal access to advice is not specific to digitalization. It was there before. So the question is whether digitalization will reduce this gap, or is it a risk to increase the this gap through digitalization. And then there were some new difficulties that emerged specifically for farmers. The first one was how to keep up to date with the pace of change in digital technology. We face in many cases that for traditional extensionists, it may be difficult to adjust to technologies that are brought by other actors. And the second one is, which is very important in our context, is how to assess the effect of digital technology, how to support farmers in identifying the costs and benefits of a digital technology. On the second level, on the potential of digital solutions to enhance advisory services, where we see a great potential is on the collective dimension of services. We really see that seeing that advisory services are not only that digitalization should not be reduced to a precision farming and individual technology used for farmers, but that there is a potential for co-designing collective digital solutions and services. And here again, we will have some examples from Spain in our work in later sessions, and from Norway as well, that highlights also this collective dimension. But of course, the challenge is then how to set settings to integrate the diversity of farmers' needs in multi-actor settings. So what is our program today and how we will contribute to this discussion. It was already introduced by the first speaker, so thank you very much for this. So as was explained, we will have two sessions. The first one on the role of advisory system and policy in maximizing digital events and minimizing digital divides. So first, Mark Redman will set the scene based on the e-discussion that you started to feed. And then we will have a panel discussion with Noelia, Nevena, and Monica. We will provide examples from both AGRILINK and from FAO various initiatives and researches. Then we will have a second session that will tackle more specifically the question of empowerment of smallholders farmers. There will be a first presentation by Pierre. We will set the scene and provide some policy recommendation for farmers training and education on digital literacy. And then a second keynote focusing more specifically on rural use digital access by Martia Pafumi. And then we will have a second panel discussion with different country case from Uganda, Kenya, China, and Norway again, mixing FAO results and AGRILINK results, and the discussion will be facilitated by Nevena Alexandrova. So after each panel discussion, we will select some of the questions that you may raise in the Q&A session. So we really encourage you to use this Q&A. And at the end of the panel discussion, we will select some of your questions to be asked to the panel. And we're also very happy to welcome Professor Gianluca Brunoi from the University of Pisa, and also a coordinator of big European research project on digitalization and living lab called Desira. And Gianluca, based on this project, but also his expertise on rural sociology, will give us a synthesis and inspiring closing observation. So thank you very much. And I think now we will move to the next session. So I will give the floor back to Mark, who will say a few words about the outcome of our online discussion. So Mark.
Yeah, thank you very, very much, Pierre. I will say a few words. I will say actually only a very few words. As Selvaraju explained, in parallel to, in preparation, preceding this webinar, we actually launched a discussion, an online discussion, what we call an e-discussion. And the discussion itself actually is beginning to develop rather nicely. And so I don't actually want to present a synthesis. I actually want to promote further participation in the e-discussion, because I think most of our participants here, many of our participants here, will find it rather enriching to contribute and to engage with this e-discussion. I'm just going to show a few slides. So I'm going to share my my screen. From my perspective, the presentation will be appearing on another screen. So if I'm turning away from the camera, please, it's because I'm looking at the other screen. I'm not being impolite. So I hope that you can see my screen okay. Again, the e-discussion is a joint activity between FAO and ourselves within the AGRILINK project. It's an online discussion using the extremely flexible and convenient and easily accessible format of a Google document. And obviously there are other platforms available, but Google is actually extremely convenient and very, very, very widespread. This is what the document looks like when you arrive there. It's very clearly formatted. There's a section for introducing yourself, and then there are a series of questions which are structured in such a way to allow easy participation. There are a total of 5 questions. The first question, and we're inviting people to respond to these questions, and then actually as more people are responding, they're then actually interacting between themselves, comparing, contrasting, contributing, challenging. So the first question is, what successful models for the digital delivery of agricultural extension and advisory services, and we're using this abbreviation of EAS. It's particularly widely used by FAO. It's not so widely used in the European context, but we do think it's rather convenient. So models for the digital delivery of agricultural extension and advisory services to small and family farms. What models are already existing? And we already have some quite interesting responses emerging to this. Responses which are coming from Estonia in the far north of Europe down into Africa to Ethiopia, for example, from Estonia to Ethiopia. So geographically, we have this really fantastic scope and the opportunity to bring together some very interesting and contrasting examples. And then this very interesting question, of course, is, okay, so models exist, but can they be replicated in all country contexts, including, of course, there are models which we're very familiar with in the European context. Can they be replicated in developing countries? And most importantly, during this process of replication, are there any hidden pitfalls? Are there any hidden potential problems to look out for? Digital solutions which are delivering what we call a digital dividend in one context, but in another actually risk exacerbating social disparities, for example, and opening up potentially digital divides. Then, very interestingly, importantly, what capacities, and this is critical also, and then what capacities at what level are needed in order to maximize the positive benefits, to maximize the dividends of digital extension and advisory services, and minimize the risk of creating more digital divisions. So again, this theme of, building on, exploiting the dividends and avoiding the potential divisions. Just a minute. Yep. I hope I'm now pinned right. The next question, what specific and targeted policy interventions, and we're very keen to use this e-discussion to draw out some policy issues and to foster some discussion about the policy implications. What specific and targeted policy interventions are needed to foster digital extension and advisory services specifically for small and family farmers? And then finally, how should advisors and advisory organizations engage with this process and play a more active role in shaping the policy and regulatory processes concerning digital extension and advisory systems, and how? Now, as I said, the discussion has already has kicked off. It's gaining some momentum very, very rapidly indeed. Currently, a total of 33 people from a very broad range of backgrounds have visited the document. We've got practitioners, we've got advisors, we've got researchers. They're contributing very practical insights, but also we've got some very interesting academic insights. We've got lots of hyperlinks to documents, publications, scientific papers, more practical documents, etc., etc. So it's also turning into a rather interesting repository. Now, the e-discussion, we've decided we will keep it open, and we wanted to use this webinar today to promote it. So please visit the e-discussion. It will remain open until Friday, the 19th of November. So that's a week tomorrow. And please participate. And as soon as I stop sharing my screen, I will be putting the link for the e-discussion. Actually, I think I can possibly even do it now. Yeah, I put the link for the e-discussion into the chat. So that's everything from me, and it's back to you, Pierre, for the continuation of the first session.
Thank you very much, Mark. And we will now move to a set of 3 presentations. mixing insight from the AGRILINK project and FAO to discuss about this role of advisory services in making the most of digital tools. And according to our plan, I think we will start with AGRILINK presentation by Noelia, Telletxea. So Noelia, if you could give us, if you could share your screen and give us some insight about AGRILINK research in Spain, in Navarra.
Hello, can you see it?
Yes, very well. So please go on, Noelia, and maybe Mark, could you pin Noelia's video? Thank you. So Noelia, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So hello everyone, I'm Noelia Telletxea and I work in crop protection in India. In this short presentation, I'm going to show you our pest monitoring and warning system, which is a very key tool that we use here in the advisory service. And I'm going to show you how we tried to promote its collaborative use among farmers in AGRILINK project. Sorry. Okay, now. First of all, I would like to introduce INTIA. INTIA is a public corporation that works at a regional level in Navarra. It's the main instrument that the government of the region uses to develop activities in the agri-food sector. We are focused on applied research and technology transfer across the value chain. And in the area of the company which is related to agriculture, we have a group of experts who develop trials in the field trying to solve farmers' problems. And we have also a group of advisors who transfer all the knowledge that is generated to farmers in cooperatives and who identify the needs that they have. The pest monitoring and warning system that we have, it has more than 30 years of experience. It is a network of monitoring and observation points that are followed every week and that offer information about the situation of most of the pests that we have in the region. As I said before, it's a key tool in the advisory service and it contributes to reduce the use of pesticides because we give treatment recommendations only when it's necessary and only when they will be effective. At the beginning, it was an internal use. It wasn't something visible and only people from India could use it. But some years ago, in the framework of a European project, we created a digital tool, which now is public and people from farmers or other stakeholders can see up-to-date information of all the pests in the platform. So there you can see how the platform looks like. One of the most interesting things, I think, is that we created it with a collaborative approach. So not only people from India, but also other stakeholders, advisors from cooperatives or agri-food industries or farmers can contribute and manage their own monitoring points. So that way we will have more information and the aim is to have a more accurate recommendation for specific areas of the region. And in the end, what we want is to involve all the sectors trying to reduce the use of pesticides. I think it's important that it's a complementary tool. So although you can see all the information there, it's necessary to combine it with face-to-face meeting with advisors. We had the opportunity to work with the Living Lab approach in AGRILINK project. The aim of our Living Lab was to improve the advisory service on integrated pest management. So we worked with different groups of farmers in cooperatives trying to identify problems and needs they had in relation to IPM. We were lucky because we found a very involved group of farmers willing to cooperate and exchange and trying to find solutions together for the cooperative. And they tested different things and shared everything with peers. And since they wanted to have accurate advisory, or they wanted to have a tailored advisory service for the cooperative, it was interesting to work with them with the pest monitoring and warning system in order to manage their own monitoring points at a cooperative level. So we worked with the tool, we offered farmers training, and we tested the tool during one campaign. After the project, and nowadays, and supported by the advisor, some of these monitoring points are still there, so they still manage some of the monitoring points, and they also meet regularly to exchange and to learn together. So I think that it was very rewarding experience for us, but also for them. And regarding the collaborative use of the pest monitoring and warning system, I think it's difficult. It's a challenge. It's not something easy because it requires training and compromise. But I think that we are facing a lot of new challenges in the use of pesticides, and in the near future we will need more and more precise information, and I think that this tool will be an essential digital tool for this purpose. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Noelia. So our idea is that we will have 3 presentations in the room, and then open the discussion to incorporate the question that you raised on the Q&A and the chat. So please make use of the Q&A to address questions to our speakers, to have an interactive moment after the discussion. So Nevena, I think it's time for your presentation. Could you please share it with us?
I am now able to share my presentation. And yes, so my talk on the COVID-19 impact on the digital delivery of extension and advisory services will be embedded in the overall effort of our unit research and extension in FAO to promote and reinforce the role of the extension and advisory services in the front line of the COVID response. And particularly, I'm talking about the regional webinar series that we launched after we have developed a policy brief on extension and advisory services in the front line of the response. And this webinar series started from May to June last year. And they were specific for Asia, Europe, and Central Asia, and Africa. As at that time of the pandemics, we had very different situations in different continents, and also an even distribution and an uneven situation, COVID impacts between different countries. So the goals of these webinars was, from one side, to study how extension and advisory services are leading the response to the COVID pandemic, how they keep up with the assuring advice to their clients, the farmers, but also to identify and share good practices and innovations about the extension and advisory services systems that others could possibly borrow or adopt. And we also use this to analyze the results against the main trends, including on digital and remote delivery of advisory services. So what did we find as a result of these webinars that actually reached out more than 1,500 expert practitioners, advisory services agents? These were, first of all, we noticed, and the country reported, an increased overall application of digital tools in extension and advisory services. but at the same time, they had an uneven impact. Why? Because different countries had a very different infrastructure, policies, and so on regarding digitalization in the agriculture sector and in rural areas. We also noted a great number of farmers that didn't have access to digital or any services because of the lockdown, because of the inability of advisors to make visits on the field and provide advice. And those advisors were not flexible enough to provide any types of digital services, even though mobile phones as technologies, for instance, were available. So there were such countries and there were such organizations that were not flexible enough to provide services. Then the digital and remote tools, we noticed they were predominantly used as alternative to face-to-face communication. So advisors try to replace to use other tools that would put them into contact with farmers. And this is why we had reported a great diversity of mobile phone and chat and video exchange applications, together with the rural radio that usually is having a great impact in case of pandemics, for instance, Ebola pandemics and also COVID. Around 70% of the impact was due to the rural radio. So most of the countries or most of the organizations have been using low tech, easy to use, friendly to use applications or technologies to stay in contact with their clients. And if you can see on the right-hand side, a reverse traffic light in which shows the level of complexity going from rural radio to complex information systems, combined applications with big data in Internet of Things applications. And it shows lower number of organizations have been using complex tools, but those complex tools actually had a much greater impact on the rural communities, including smallholders. So what was also noticeable is that advisory services were still using the tools for communication primarily, or to provide some information, but not to analyze the information, not to turn the information into the knowledge. So we say the digital back office potential is still to be realized. Also, we noticed that there was an increased communication and improved quality of the communication and efficiency of the communication processes between farmers and advisory services, but also between the agriculture innovation system actors as a whole and different extension organizations within the EAS system. Also, we noted an emergence of e-commerce platforms and digital credit services, especially in the post-lockdown phases, where the social economic issues of farmers have been becoming more pressing, and advisory services were trying to improve the access of the farmers to credits and to markets. And on the emergence of the platforms, so what I can share with you, there were different types of emerging platforms. Some were simply lists with sellers and buyers. Others were connected to QR codes, for instance, again, type of lists of databases like the Pineapple Challenge in India, as you can see, but some were more complicated, for instance, involving also logistics, not only providing information. And in many cases, we noticed increasingly extension and advisory services were providing support to farmers to participate, to connect to these e-commerce platforms. Based on our research, we are able to distinguish several factors of success and lessons learned, one of which is the availability of a critical mass of digital knowledge, of digital literacy was very important. Also, combined solutions, and this connects very much with what Pierre reported a minute ago. Combined solutions lead to better results. Greater impact has been achieved within bigger and well-coordinated extension and advisory services systems. Entrepreneurship and partnerships play a great role. For instance, the lack of entrepreneurships in the case of some countries and some organizations, the lack of incentives for those advisors to use any type of possibilities like remote and digital tools impeded them to provide necessary services, necessary advice to farmers in critical moments. When I was elaborating on the combined solutions and the greater impact of the bigger and well-coordinated systems, I would like to give one excellent example of the digital and remote service provided on plant protection in Sichuan province of China, where more than 30 million local smallholder farmers have been benefited from an excellently organized information systems combined with expertise, chat, platform, Internet of Things, other methodologies like pheromone traps that were digitalized in terms of using mobile apps, an outreach with emails and TVs in order to reach this impact. And finally, some take-home messages and conclusions also regarding the policy perspectives that we very much try to promote here in this webinar. So the COVID-19 pandemic demonstrated that the digitalization in extension and advisory services is a fact. It's here to stay. It's not only a luxury tool, but actually is necessity in many of the cases. But extension and advisory services system needs to innovate from within, to be innovative, and also to look in the future and exactly to try to anticipate different opportunities. We live in a very dynamic world with dynamic markets and dynamic new technologies emerging. So the advisory services need to be prepared to this situation. This is why now with our unit, we are planning to launch a global foresight exercise on extension and advisory services. We also find capacities, policy, investments, and infrastructure are very important and have to be very much linked to extension and digitalization in advisory services. Specifically, policy interventions are needed to ensure equitable access to digital advice, and also the transitions from the communication, information, and knowledge generation and knowledge use by digital tools. So you can see some of our recent publications, and we are going to provide you with more in the chat. Thank you very much. Over to you, Pierre.
Thank you, Nevena. I will now give the floor to Monica for our presentation. And then we will try to, we're a bit behind schedule, so we will take only 1 or 2 questions, but I think I will raise one from the chat or looking at your 3 presentations. So, yes, Monica, could you put your presentation mode, please? Perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I'll be presenting challenges and capacity gaps in smallholder access to digital extension and advisory services with a focus on Kenya and Uganda. And this is based on why my slides are not moving. Okay, so this is based on a study that KABI and FAO jointly implemented. Actually, the study looked at 3 strands. One was on understanding the demand side factors for access to extension and digital extension and advisory services, where we talked to the farmers in Kenya and Uganda. But we also looked at the supply side, where we had interviews with extension service providers and digital service providers and some few policy makers. And then we also did a comprehensive analysis of the institutional and policy frameworks that support or are not in support of the digital extension, which is on the regulation side. But for this purpose, I will focus on the demand side factors in this small talk. So we found that the digital farmers were still accessing extension through non-digital approaches, and these remain dominant. But we also noted that a few other farmers were accessing extension through digital tools, but mainly dominated by radio, which we basically just said it is electronic sources, not necessarily radio, considering, I mean, not necessarily digital, considering that most of the radio programming may be analog and not necessarily digital. But we also found that at least 32% of farmers in Kenya and only 10% in Uganda accessed extension and advisory services via mobile phones, either through push messages or messages or information inquiry from extension workers or through e-extension or e-plant clinics. In terms of the barriers that the farmers face in accessing digital extension advice, there are quite many, but generally 5 of them came out strongly. The first one being low awareness of digital services availability. Most farmers are not aware that actually they could get extension advice through digital tools. And then lack of access to affordable internet services. This was particularly strong cause in Uganda compared to Kenya, where farmers find internet services very unaffordable. And there is limited broadband, so they have to really rely on mobile data bundles, which are quite costly. And then there was also an issue on low digital literacy levels, where most farmers are not able to really utilize digital tools. And also if they got messages on their phones, sometimes they are not able to comprehend because maybe they are not well educated, some low literacy levels and so on. So digital literacy becomes a key concern if we need to venture into this area. But there was also lack of ownership and control of digital devices. In some cases, the phones are very expensive. They are not affordable due to taxes and other tariffs that are put on them. And when they have, it's not really that they have control, especially when it is in the household and it is between husband and wife. One has control over it and the other may not really control how they use it to access extension. And then finally was the limited technical support to use these digital devices. Then when we looked across gender and age, of course, older people are less likely to have issue to use digital extension, and women as well were more excluded in terms of accessing digital tools. This then implies that there may be need to integrate both digital and face-to-face methods to address challenges for access to information. But as we are also going to see in the next slide, is that some information really can only be presented in certain formats. So approaching digital extension as the primary or sole approach then could cause some bit of disadvantage. So if I'm to look at the information gaps, one is for farmers who actually obtained information from different tools, mentioned something about maybe crop diseases, about market information, weather forecast. But we find really that this information focuses more on advisory. And it's not surprising because then this is the information that can easily be sent out in formats that can go via mobile or via digital approaches. But then they also express concerns and gaps in different other types of information. Though the importance really varied across the study areas, there was a general or a consistent demand for information on how to do diagnosis for crop pest problems and how to manage them. Then on pesticide use, there was an array of queries or concerns, also relating to quality of the pesticides, safety, safe handling, and other issues around pesticides. Livestock production and health, that one seems to be largely an uncovered area when it comes to extension support. Then markets, and then things about seed quality. And when you really look at these information types where they indicate gaps, these are really, they represent areas where information need to be context specific to support farmer decision. So when we are thinking of digital, we also need to really consider in what context and where are these farmers located, and can this information really be generalized, or do we need to be specific? Generally, in terms of investment areas, if we are to address digital needs for smallholder farmers, some of the investment areas is on digital literacy for smallholder farmers and extension service providers. And this can be through platforms like e-learning or any other tools that may be compatible with mobile phones, maybe through apps, e-clinics, and things like that. And then we also need to develop farmer-centered content, and which is customizable to different delivery channels. Because if we have information about a certain topic, we want to be able to create that content in a format that can be delivered maybe via radio, it can be delivered through mobile phone, it can be delivered through face-to-face, so that the extension workers and farmers have options of how they can access different information. Then we also need to consider participatory design methodologies that consider new insights about local information needs, user preferences, and capacities. And then farmer profiling and provision of context-based content that is based on the farming systems. This I mentioned earlier, they need to really be context specific. And then integration of approaches, maybe traditional media, new ICTs, to integrate this in the extension toolkit so that the extension workers have a broad range of tools that can complement their traditional approaches, but also these tools can be accessible in different other platforms by farmers. And then lastly, we are also looking at, it would be recommended to support policy development and investment, especially looking at how do we enable access to digital devices, how do we enable access to internet that is affordable. For this more information, this study was published, so you'll get this link in this PowerPoint as it is shared. And then for my last slides, I thought some people may not know about KABI. I'll borrow 30 seconds to talk about KABI. So KABI is an international non-for-profit organization that improves people's lives by providing information and applying scientific expertise to solve problems in agriculture and environment. And our areas of expertise are those 6 around crop health, development, communication and extension, digital development, invasive species, work, publishing, value chains. You can really find most of this information on our website, and I thank you very much. Over, Pierre.
Yes, thank you. So could you stop sharing your, yes, thank you. Unfortunately, we are running 10 minutes beyond schedule, so I will be just raising 2 questions that I see in the chat. And maybe just some very brief answer, please. First of all, just personal feedback. I think it's very interesting to have this cross-fertilization, and it's very, at least from the European perspective, it's nice for us to go a bit beyond our European policy perspective and broaden our perspective. But so 2 a bit original questions that I see in the chat. One is about gender issue. In other sectors, like in research, there have been some consideration about the effects of COVID on labor and access to different tasks and activity. And I was wondering, Nevena or Monica, whether in your study you have seen some gender issue regarding the use and condition of use of digital solutions. I know there have been some PhD theses on this subject, so I wanted to have your point of view. And there was one very technical question for Noelia, but I think it's a broader question. The question was raised very technically, and on the technical side, maybe you can answer on the Q&A, Noelia, which was about the density of capture. But I think it really relates to this question of low-cost digital technology, which is very important. And I wanted to know whether someone could reflect in the panel on this issue of how do you address the question of finding low-cost technology to involve collectively a diversity of farms. So maybe a first comment on gender from one of you, and please short answers because we need them to move on to the next session.
Thank you, Pierre. I will start. Actually, in our study, we did it was not a study. These were reflections from webinars. The countries haven't reported particularly gender gap associated with the COVID. However, what we know, there are very different situations with regard to the use of internet and ICTs in different continents. A huge gender gap exists still in the African continent, not so much in Europe and Central Asia, and even we have a let's say positive trend, like 2% more women are using information and communication technologies in Latin America. So the perspective is very different, but still we have to address the needs of the most vulnerable, usually smallholders, but including women and youth, with respect to digitalization. Over to you.
Is there any comment on this? Although I would be happy to have one comment on this low-cost dimension, and if we are to use some sensors and stuff, how to decide a good level of sensors. So maybe Noelia, you could give a word, maybe whether this low-cost was an issue in Europe, and maybe Monica could also elaborate on this point. So Noelia, do you have some elements from your experience about the cost of sensors and technology? I'm not sure that Noelia is with us or hearing us. Maybe there is technical issue, so I will give the floor to Monica, whether you want to extend a bit on this question of low-cost technology based on your KABI
Sorry,
survey.
I was answering the question in the chat, so can you ask me the question again?
Okay, okay, no, I was saying that there was this question of number of sensors, but I guess there was some issue of cost, and that the issue of low-cost technology was raised. Was this an issue in your work to develop the technology? How do you manage with to have is it an aim to have some kind of low-cost technology easy to disseminate?
The cost is not a problem because it's a very powerful tool, and we invest a lot on it. And for farmers, it could be a problem, but we are willing to help them with the cost of these techniques. And we also received public money for this issue because we are a public company, so there is no problem in that sense.
Okay, thank you. So there is some public investment behind. Monica, would you have to have a final word on one of this issue?
Unfortunately, sorry, I didn't understand the question on the technology, but I can make a comment on the issue of gender.
Yes, please.
Yeah, certainly we find that women and young farmers are generally disadvantaged when it comes to, women and older farmers when it comes to access to digital tools. One is because they may have not enough literacy, but also they don't own these tools. So that is the level of disadvantage, and but we have also found innovative approaches whereby, for example, community-based video screening is used, where some innovators have used what they call crowd pullers, and they're able to reach to different categories of farmers in different areas. So the challenge exists in terms of gender divide, but there are possible ways or alternatives to be able to address that, as we saw in our study, some good case studies of how technology can be used.
Okay, thank you very much. Unfortunately, I think we have to go to stop and to go to the next session. It will be facilitated by Nevena. I encourage the panelists to go to the Q&A. There are some questions for you, so if you could have a look to them and answer. So thank you very much. So Nevena will leave to you to facilitate the second session.